I want to tell you something before we start. What you are about to hear is going to make some of you uncomfortable. It is going to challenge things you were taught before you were old enough to question them. It is going to ask you to look at a system you may have trusted your entire life and ask who built it, why they built it, and who it was actually designed to serve. This is not an attack on your faith. This is not an attempt to take God away from you. This is the opposite. This is what Prodigal has always been about. Stripping away the manipulation so you can find what is actually true underneath it. My name is Don Jackson. I wrote a book called Prodigal, Leaving Church and Finding God. And everything I learned on that journey, everything that broke me open and put me back together, starts with the question we are going to ask today. What did Jesus actually teach and what happened to it? To understand what happened, you first have to understand what Jesus was actually doing and why it was so dangerous. Rome's economy in the first century was not built on trade. It was not built on manufacturing. It was built almost entirely on slavery. Slaves were property. They built the roads. They worked the farms. They maintained the households of the wealthy. The entire wealth of the Roman ruling class rested on one assumption: that human beings would continue to obey, that they would show up, perform, and never question the order of things. Into this world came Jesus. What Jesus taught can be summarized in a single concept: the divine spark. The idea that inside every human being, not just the educated, not just the free, not just the powerful, but every human being, including the slave, including the poor, including the outcast, there is a fragment of the divine, a direct connection to what some call God, what others call the universe, what the ancient philosophers called ultimate truth. And the way to access that spark, according to Jesus, was not through an institution, not through a priest, not through ritual obedience, but through attention, through listening carefully to the right words, letting them resonate in you, and waking up to the truth that you are already free. Think about what it meant to a slave in the Roman Empire to hear that message. It did not just offer comfort, it offered defiance. If your soul is already free, if there is a power inside you greater than the power of your master, greater even than the power of Rome, then why obey? This is precisely why the Romans killed him. Not because he was a blasphemer, not because he claimed to be the Son of God. Rome was full of people making those claims. He was killed because he was undermining the economic foundation of the empire. Slaves are property. A philosophy that liberates slaves is theft. And so Jesus was executed alongside two actual thieves. Not coincidentally, symbolically, because to Rome, that is exactly what he was, a man stealing their most valuable asset. Rome executed Jesus for teaching freedom. 3 centuries later, Rome made his religion the official faith of the state. How does that happen? How does the empire that killed a man for threatening its power end up adopting his message as its own? The answer is one man, and one of the most sophisticated operations in human history. His name is Paul. Paul is one of the most fascinating and troubling figures in all of Western history. His background alone should raise questions. He was Jewish, but grew up in the Greek world. He was wealthy, deeply educated, not in philosophy, but in rhetoric. He was by training and temperament what the ancient Greeks called a sophist. Now, this distinction matters enormously. The philosopher believes there is an eternal truth and that the purpose of thought is to approach it. Philosophy is liberation, the pursuit of what is real, even when what is real is uncomfortable. Sophistry believes something else entirely. The sophist says there is no eternal truth. There is only language. Words do not point to reality. Words are reality. And if you control the words, you control the world. The sophist does not seek truth. The sophist seeks victory. The sophist changes the definition of the terms. The sophist makes slavery sound like love, makes obedience sound like freedom, makes control sound like salvation. There are 3 historical mysteries about Paul that scholars have never been able to fully resolve. First, why would a wealthy, educated man suddenly become passionate about a fringe movement of poor Jewish peasants? There is no compelling personal explanation. Second, Paul was, before his supposed conversion, a fanatical persecutor of Christians. He was hunting them down with official authorization. Then, according to the book of Acts, a light blinds him on the road to Damascus. A voice speaks, and he becomes their most powerful advocate. This is a dramatic reversal with no satisfying explanation. Third, and most revealing, Paul spent decades traveling across the Roman Empire conducting what amounts to an enormous and expensive missionary operation. He traveled with secretaries. He maintained correspondence with dozens of communities. He was not a poor man walking barefoot across Asia Minor. This was an organized, funded operation. Where did the money come from? The answer, if you are willing to look at it directly, is that Paul almost certainly operated as an agent. Whether he was an agent of the Roman Empire working to neutralize the Jewish resistance movement, or an agent of the Jewish priestly leadership, or, most likely, a double agent serving both and ultimately serving himself. The evidence points in one direction. A man who works for free does not bring secretaries on a 10-year journey across 3 continents. A man working for God does not invoke his Roman citizenship the moment he is threatened. A true martyr does not use his legal status to avoid punishment and demand an audience with the emperor. Paul was sophisticated, strategic, and connected. He was, in the most precise sense of the word, an operator. What Paul actually built was a religious product designed for mass adoption. And to build it, he synthesized the 3 great cultures of his world into a single system. Each one contributed something essential. From the Jewish tradition, Paul took the expectation of a coming Messiah. Jewish communities throughout the Roman world were waiting for a warrior Messiah, a king who would lead righteous war against Rome and restore Israel. This was a militantly dangerous theology from Rome's perspective. Paul's genius was to redirect it. Jesus, he argued, was the Messiah, but not a Messiah of war. His kingdom was not of this world. Do not resist Rome, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. In a single rhetorical move, Paul neutralized the most politically explosive element of Jewish theology. From the Greek tradition, Paul drew on the mystery cults, ancient religious societies with rituals of sacred communion, consuming the body of the divine, surrendering individual identity into collective union. Paul transplanted this ritual almost unchanged into Christianity. He called it the Eucharist, and in doing so, he imported one of the deepest psychological technologies of the ancient world into his new religion. From the Roman tradition, Paul borrowed the social architecture of the patriarch. Roman society was structured around a supreme male authority at the top of a hierarchy, with sons, clients, freedmen, and slaves below him. Networks of loyalty and productivity spreading outward like a franchise. Paul took this structure and reproduced it in the church. At the top, a bishop. Below him, priests and elders. Below them, the faithful. The structural logic was identical to Rome. The same system that built the empire would now build the church. And here is the move that completed the entire architecture: original sin. The idea that every human being is born broken, not with a divine spark, but in a state of fundamental corruption, a corruption inherited from Adam and Eve. You cannot trust your own instincts, your own heart, your own moral reasoning, because these faculties are already infected by sin. The very capacity for independent judgment that Jesus said was the path to the divine was reframed by Paul as the primary symptom of your fallen nature. Pride, meaning any kind of self-directed confidence, any trust in your own perception, any refusal to defer to authority, is the original sin. You can see the architecture now. You cannot trust yourself. You cannot think for yourself. You cannot find truth independently. You are broken. You need to be saved. Only the church can save you. Therefore, you must submit to the church completely and without reservation. The slaves of Rome became the congregation of the church. The patriarchs of Rome became its bishops. The franchise model continued undisturbed under a new logo. I need you to feel what this actually means, because this is not just ancient history. This is not something that happened to people 2,000 years ago in Rome. This system, Paul's system, was the theological foundation used to enslave black people in America for 250 years. When Paul writes to slaves, and I need you to hear this directly, he says, "You are free, but you are free as a slave of Christ. Therefore, do not concern yourself with your earthly bondage. Your true freedom is spiritual, and your spiritual freedom is expressed through obedience to Christ," which means in practice, obedience to your masters as well. Read that again. The slave who was told by Jesus that he was already free was now told by Paul that his freedom was best expressed by staying exactly where he was. That was not an accident. That was the design. The curse of Ham, the doctrine that black people were born to serve, the theology that made enslaved people believe that God had ordained their bondage, that resistance was sin, that suffering was holy. That was Paul's system at work. The same sophistry, the same rhetorical inversion, the same cage, built from the same material as the key. And here is what stays with me. The black church, the institution that sustained black communities through slavery, through Jim Crow, through every assault this country leveled against us, was built on the same structural model that Paul designed for Rome. The love was real, the community was real, the survival was real, and the control was also real. Both things were true simultaneously. That is the genius of the system, and also its cruelty. The question I had to ask, the question my book is asking, is not whether the black church was good or bad. The question is what happens when you strip away Paul's additions and go back to what Jesus actually said. What happens when you tell black people, tell anybody, that the divine spark is already in them, that no institution stands between them and God, that they are already free. That is the message that Rome executed Jesus for delivering. And it is still dangerous today. I left the church, not because I stopped believing in God, but because I started believing in myself. And I had been taught for a very long time that those two things were in conflict. They are not. That is the lie. The book I wrote, Prodigal, Leaving Church and Finding God, is my attempt to document that journey, to trace the path from the institution back to the thing the institution was built on top of, back to the original message, back to the spark. What you heard today is not fringe scholarship. This is mainstream historical and theological research that has been available for decades. What is radical is not the information. What is radical is saying it out loud, in a format your community can actually access, without requiring a theology degree to understand it. That is what Prodigal is for. We are not here to tell you what to believe. We are not here to replace one institution with another. We are here to do what Jesus was actually doing, to strip away the layers of control and manipulation and hand you back the one thing that was always yours. Your own mind, your own conscience, your own direct connection to whatever truth actually is. The spark is still there. The question is only whether you are paying attention to it. I am Don Jackson. This is Prodigal. Take your power back.
What if leaving is how you find God? Prodigal. Read it, then decide.